What up? You know how we do. I know that's right. Yeah.
Oh, you don't like them? Oh, I don't want to say what I was going to say.
Uh-oh.
Salty. No, I was just going to say, like,
Hmm?
you smoking every day, right?
Hmm.
Alright, so I was just going to come up here real quick and do it.
Oh, that shit sounds good.
You can't help but notice lately that the universe actually does exist. Pretty neat, right? But why? Why does anything exist? Isn't it equally, if not more likely, that nothing should exist instead? Or is there something fundamental about the nature of reality, which means the universe was destined to begin and endure? Let's find out. As we ask, why does the universe exist? Starting at number 5. There's no such thing as nothing.
Especially up in here.
I've been wanting it.
The Big Bang is the most commonly accepted explanation as to how our universe sprang into existence. But what triggered this spectacular event? Why did the Big Bang even occur at all? Surely it's easier for nothing to happen than something. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so satisfying when your friends cancel your plans. Oh, I don't have to leave the house and get dressed and shower. Oh, thank God. But according to quantum mechanics, which is the study of super tiny business that even ants don't know about, the idea of nothingness persisting for all time is unrealistic, as there's no such thing as empty space. Even in a perfect vacuum, there are particles and antiparticles which flash in and out of existence. They come from nowhere. And they return to nowhere once they're done.
And long pants. I'm like Florida guy.
We've never been able to observe such particles for very long because they're incredibly unstable. But this just goes to show how things can genuinely appear out of nothing. So, even if there was an endless void in place before the universe flashed into existence, that condition, it turns out, is as fertile as compost when it comes to sprouting particles, planets, and universes. But where did our universe and these phantom particles come from? If there was genuinely nothing on our plane of existence, then did our universe arrive here from somewhere else? And if so, what's to stop it happening again? Ooh, double universe! That sounds so fun. At number 4, because is unstable. Another field which attempts to explain why the universe exists is general relativity, although she and quantum mechanics rarely make for cozy bedfellows. Scientists have struggled to reconcile these two for a long time. But when it's general relativity's birthday and quantum mechanics puts out, we end up with some interesting ideas. Stephen Hawking discovered as much when he tried to describe black holes by applying quantum theory to the smallest scale of space. Hawking found that space is unstable, and rather than being a smooth, uniform void, empty space and time eventually actually starts to froth bubbles like a dog with a mouthful of dish soap. These bubbles of space-time form spontaneously out of nothing, just like those weird particles we mentioned. And we think a similar bubble may have formed out of nothing to create our entire universe. But if that's true, then why haven't more bubbles formed since? And isn't it a bit of a leap to go from a tiny quantum bubble in space-time to a gargantuan universe of 1 trillion galaxies? That's some weight gain, pal. So how does that work? At 3, because of cosmic inflation. Inflation theory claims that in the fraction of a second after the Big Bang occurred, the quantum bubble of space-time which created our universe did so by expanding at an incredible rate of speed. At no time at all, this bubble went from being smaller than an atom's nucleus to the size of a grain of sand. And while this may not sound like much, it's actually mind-blowing. A nucleus is typically 10,000 times smaller than an atom. And if anything were to increase by that much, you'd sure as heck know about it. It's like a pea suddenly expanding to the size of a sports stadium. And this is just the difference between a nucleus and an atom. In a single grain of sand, there are 50 million atoms. That's 50 quintillion, or 50 with 18 zeros after it. So, just one tiny pea will blow up to form 50 quintillion Fenway Parks, Old Trafford's, and wherever the heck the Toronto Argonauts are playing this year, all in a fraction of a second. This rapid expansion fits in with our current understanding of the Big Bang, but it also tells us some more interesting things. It explains why the universe's cosmic radiation background is so neat and uniform, and it tells us our universe is flat.
Where's what?
At 2, because we're flat. Our universe's space-time is theorized to exist in one of 3 different forms: flat as a pancake, curved outwards like this banana, or it curves inwards like this other banana. Based on calculations made according to inflation theory, we think we know the answer. It's flat. And this conclusion is crucial if our other theories about the universe are to hold up. Many of the ideas we've spoken of are only possible in a flat universe, as its rapid expansion would have required a heck of a lot of energy. But in the flat universe model, this energy comes from the gravitational forces of the matter within it. In a curved universe, there would have been an imbalance, and inflation wouldn't have been possible. But a flat universe has the balance required to allow a tiny quantum space-time bubble to inflate all the way to our fancy-pants universe with stars, planets, life, and that subway on the corner nobody goes to because it smells like a wet dog. And by the way, remember when we asked if these space bubbles had formed more than once? Well, Stanford's Andre Lind says they have, and that this may be the key to how the multiverse exists. And at number 1, the perpetual creation.
Of the man?
Yeah.
When we think about a time before our universe existed, we tend to imagine endless space, with reality just waiting for our universe to fill, like an understuffed burrito. But this is a very universe-centric viewpoint, because according to Andre Lind, these bubbles have been expanding and creating universes for all time,
Said if I didn't have to work, I would have
and
been
will continue to do so forever. Our universe is surrounded by empty space, and in this space, more bubbles form, with each capable of creating another universe vastly different to our own. In these universes, there may be 8, 9, or 10 dimensions instead of our 4. They might have a completely unique array of matter. Gravity might be purple. 4chan might be a wholesome Christian activity board. Everything is possible if the inflation theory is correct. And due to the bizarre nature of space-time, these other universes may exist on the same level of existence, or on a completely new plane to our own. So, to return to the question we asked at the beginning, it seems the universe exists because of 2 basic principles: that something can erupt from nothing, and that given an infinite amount of time, space, or both, everything that can happen will happen. Therefore, it is simply impossible for universes to never come into existence if you waited around long enough. And the reason we are here to question this is because we just happened to be created in one of the moments when something happened. Is this a coincidence? Or is there something else to the universe we've not quite hit on yet? Obviously, without the conditions for life, we would never be able to know what the universe is, because we wouldn't exist. But would the universe exist if we were not here to perceive it? We're going to explore this idea in our bonus video, The Conscious Universe, which you can watch on our Patreon page at patreon.com/Strange Mysteries. For a $2 a month pledge, which you can cancel at any time, you'll get to watch this and all our bonus content, which goes deeper and darker into every topic than YouTube allows. If you don't want to donate, then it's cool. We won't stop perceiving the universe just to be spiteful, but we will strive to continue to provide the best content possible under YouTube's restrictions. As you'll find out by watching our recent video on the meaning of life in relation to the universe. Time is a curious thing. Time can be exact. Time can be imprecise. Time can be slow for some and faster for others. Time exists in the mind, and it exists in the universe. And according to some theories, one day time may even come to a halt. So let's find out how, why, and when in our video which seeks to answer the question, will time end? Number 5. Time requires consciousness. In our recent video on what happens when you die, we briefly touched upon an idea which may be relevant to the question of whether time...
Science is full of ideas that seem hard to believe. Take quantum mechanics. Until we look at it. Most physicists will tell you where the particle ends up is just a roll of the dice. But there's another theory. My conscious mind could be controlling this subatomic world. And the sixth sense could be what makes the universe tick.
Perhaps the ultimate proof of just how unsettling quantum mechanics can be is something called the double-slit experiment. It will make you question whether reality exists at all. This simple configuration shoots particles of light called photons, one at a time, through two tiny slits in a screen.
We have a laser which produces light. This light is attenuated such that only one photon at a time emerges. This photon passes through a two-slit assembly, and then we have a camera which registers the pattern behind the two-slit assembly. So what we see is that the photons arrive one by one on the screen, some here, some there, and it looks pretty random.
Since the photons travel one by one, some through this slit, some through that slit, you would expect them to leave a pattern of two stripes on the wall. And you would be wrong. They mysteriously create a band of stripes. This is what you would expect to see if a constant beam of light shined through the two slits. It would spread across the wall like a wave. So how can single bullet-like particles of light create a wave pattern? This could only happen if the particles go through both slits at the same time. In other words, the particle is in two places at once. But strangest of all is what happens when you put detectors next to the slits. When the photons are being watched, the wave pattern disappears. Take away the detectors, and the wave pattern comes back. This suggests that we can change the way reality behaves just by looking at it. Does this mean that reality itself is not real?
The modern answer is that the path taken by the photon is not an element of reality. We are not allowed to talk about the photon passing through this or this slit. Neither are we allowed to say that the photons pass through both slits. All this kind of language is not applicable.
Michio Kaku is a theoretical physicist. As a pioneer of string theory, which proposes the world is actually nine-dimensional, he believes scientists need to keep an open mind about the sixth sense, no matter how strange it may sound.
We physicists are conservative revolutionaries in the sense that we have to be open to all sorts of crazy, bizarre phenomena. Who would have thought that there's something called radioactivity? Who would have thought that we would have quantum forces? So we have to be open to these things. The most successful physical theory of all time is called quantum mechanics, the theory of the atom,
Yeah,
because it's based
guys?
on the idea of probabilities, that you don't really know where an electron is, and electrons can exist in some sense in multiple states at the same time.
The fuzzy nature of subatomic particles might just provide a way to explain the sixth sense. Erwin Schrödinger, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, designed a thought experiment to drive home the strange rules of his theory. Let's say we put a cat and a vial of poison in a box. We add an atom of radioactive uranium and a Geiger counter. If the uranium decays, it sets off the Geiger counter, which then releases the poison and silently kills the cat. Before we open the box and look, we can't actually know whether the uranium has decayed or not, since radioactive decay is a probabilistic quantum event.
Here's the question. Is the cat dead or alive? Well, according to quantum mechanics, the cat is neither dead nor alive, but the sum of the two states.
Is your cat dead or alive?
Well, at that point, you say, well, that's nonsense. That's preposterous. How can you be both dead and alive simultaneously?
Schrödinger's cat was supposed to show that nothing in this universe is certain until someone makes a measurement. But another pioneer of quantum mechanics, Eugene Wigner, believed it could teach us something else about the working of the universe. That consciousness controls everything.
Wigner said, let's take it
do that
one
and play
step
games,
farther.
and
If
I wanna try to
a
take them
human
some places,
being
but
looks at the
you
cat,
can't do it during the
I am
week.
conscious.
that's why,
Therefore,
like on the weekends, I
consciousness
just
determines
me and him just hang out.
existence. At that point, Einstein went ballistic and said, what? You're saying that the fact that you are a conscious being determines the fact that the cat is alive? Answer is yes. And Wigner made one more step. And that is, how do I know I'm alive? You see, the cat and me, we're part of the same universe. If I don't know the cat is alive or dead, I could also be dead at the same time and not even know it. So who determines that I'm alive? Well, Wigner's fan looks at me, I look at the cat, and we exist. But then who looks at Wigner's friend? And there's an infinite chain of people looking at people, until finally you hit cosmic consciousness. Some consciousness that's ethereal, that envelops the universe, which looks at us and says, aha, the cat is alive.
Wigner believed that consciousness is an inextricable part of reality, that nothing really happens in the physical world unless a conscious mind observes it. Most physicists regard cosmic consciousness as an intriguing idea that will never be provable. What does it take to
You
think?
want to know what you do for 10?
Inside my head is a network of several billion buzzing neurons. In a computer, electrical pulses scurry
I
across
cooked
a
some beef
maze
stew
of
last night,
microscopic
man. Beef
circuits.
stew and
Now,
rice
some scientists
and
are building
asparagus.
computers
So
out
there's
of
that. I'll
atoms,
probably just eat leftovers in there.
deriving logic from the laws
I gotta
of
take
quantum
something out to cook
mechanics.
for tomorrow, though.
Since those laws apply to the entire universe, why couldn't the universe think? At MIT, Seth Lloyd welcomes us into the weird and wondrous world of quantum computing. This is a machine that calculates in a way that will one day leave our current computers in the dust. It is based on the idea that atoms and every subatomic particle can think.
Every atom, every elementary particle stores bits of information. So, electron spinning like that is 0, electron spinning like that is 1. And every time two particles collide, those bits get flipped and processed.
The key to a quantum computer's power is that it can think more than one thing at a time. But to understand how that can be, we need to comprehend the strange science of quantum mechanics.
The key thing to remember about quantum mechanics is that quantum mechanics is weird. This is a technical term. It means funky, counterintuitive. It's like the James Brown of sciences. You don't know what's going on or what's going to happen.
This motherfucking scientist just made a James Brown reference.
As scientists have studied nature at the microscopic level, they have noticed that particles can actually exist in more than one place at the same time. And while they have struggled to explain why this should happen, Seth and his colleagues in quantum computing have simply accepted it and used it to their advantage.
I will now use the sophisticated Light-Bright device to demonstrate the difference between classical computers and quantum computers. So in any computer, classical or quantum, a bit can be represented by electron over here. Now, in a classical computer, the electron is either over here, 0,
Or 1.
or over there, 1.
Binary.
It is definitely not 0 and 1 at the same time. But in a quantum computer, electrons very happily are both 0 and 1 at the same time. To see how this affects computation, let's suppose that electron over here says, do this. Let's tell all these other bits to make some interesting pattern. And now you see what we have is we don't just have one bit that is doing this and that at the same time. We have many, many bits that are doing this and that at the same time. So the quantum computer is doing two computations in some funky quantum sense at the same time. And hey, there's no reason to stop there. Quantum computer is completely happy doing 100 or 1,000 or a billion or as many things as there are elementary particles in the universe all at the same time. The more the merrier.
Seth has spent the last 2 decades making this ordered rearrangement of quantum bits work in a real device. One that can do real calculations. The heart of this quantum computer is chilled with liquid helium and consists of a small superconducting electrical circuit known as a qubit.
This qubit is a little tiny thing. It sits in a tiny little gold package like this. And in the middle of it, there's a tiny little circuit which a supercurrent can go around like this forever, or it can go around like that forever. So we call supercurrent going around like this 0, and supercurrent going around like that 1, and supercurrent going around this way and that way at the same time, 0 and 1 at the same time. All this rack of expensive equipment here is designed to talk to the qubit by sending microwave signals to it, to tickle it and massage it. My job as a quantum mechanical engineer is kind of like a quantum atomic masseur. We like massage these molecules in a bunch of different ways, and if you massage the molecule the right way, you can get this wiggling and jiggling so that it's actually performing a computation. So the molecule, as it relaxes and says, oh, it feels so good, it says, oh, if you really want me to multiply 3 times 5, I'll do it for you.
Quantum computing is still the...
Yeah.
Consciousness and its place in reality. Adrian here. Today I'm talking to the biologist Rupert Sheldrake, which is a conversation I've really been looking forward to. As many of you I'm sure will know, Rupert is a biologist who is known for his controversial theory that nature has a kind of memory which shapes the evolution of both life and the entire universe. Rupert also believes that consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality, and he shares today some of the reasons he holds this view with me today. Rupert is also known for his experiments which seem to demonstrate that minds may not be as confined to brains as we might generally think. And we talk about some of his research on telepathy in both humans and animals. So over the last couple of months, I've been reading Rupert's last 3 books, and I've been really excited about this conversation and looking forward to talking with him about some of his ideas. The last thing that I need to mention before we get started is that Waking Cosmos is entirely funded by subscribers on Patreon. I don't do any adverts, so if you would like to help me keep the lights on here at Waking Cosmos and support my work, please consider going over to patreon.com/wakingcosmos and becoming a Patreon subscriber. As well as helping me to continue to do this work, Patreon subscribers also get early access to every episode, as well as other perks and ways to participate. I do still have quite a way to go before I reach my goal on Patreon, where this becomes something that makes sense for me to do financially on a full-time basis, which is really my hope to eventually get to. So if you do have disposable income and you do find some value in these conversations, Patreon is the best way to support this project and my work. And my sincere gratitude to those of you who are already doing that. Okay, thank you for bearing with me. Without further delay, I give you Dr. Rupert Sheldrake. Hi Rupert, great to be talking with you. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks, Adrian. Good to be with you.
So I've followed your work for a long time, and I really do think that your main theory of morphic resonance is really interesting and compelling, this idea that there's a kind of memory behind nature. And I'd really like to ask you about morphic resonance today. But I'd like to start this conversation talking about science in general, because I really also appreciate a lot of what you said about science and a need to expand science beyond a strictly mechanistic or materialist way of seeing nature. And in particular, you've done some really interesting work bringing to light some of the common assumptions that science sometimes operates on, and a number of them which might in fact be wrong and could be holding us back and essentially narrowing what science could be. So, Rupert, maybe we could start here. Could you perhaps give an example of one of these assumptions?
One of the 10 assumptions I discuss in my book, The Science Delusion, is the assumption that the mind is the brain. Mental activity is brain activity, or as materialists sometimes say, minds are what brains do. In other words, all our consciousness is inside our heads. Everything we see, feel, touch, even our body image, it's all inside our heads. So when I look at something, I look out of the window now at a tree, the image of the tree that I'm seeing is somehow a representation of the tree inside my brain. Now that's one of the assumptions I discuss, and I think it's an assumption that has almost no experimental basis, no evidential basis, and is purely dogmatic.
But that's something I was always pondering over too, is like your brain is encased inside your skull. There's no light inside your body. There is no real contact with the outside world other than your senses. So everything that we see and perceive is not actually what it is. It's still being transmitted and translated through our cortex to our fucking brains to process it. And it's like, how real is reality? Because everything is in our fucking mind.
That flows from the materialist philosophy. What I mean by that is that when I see the image of the tree, the image doesn't seem to be inside my brain, it seems to be outside my brain where the tree actually is. My primary experience is of images being located in the world around me as I look at them. And I take seriously the idea that they really are there, that light comes into the eyes, changes happen in the brain, and we project out the images to where they seem to be. So the mind is extended beyond the brain rather than being all inside the brain. So that's the subject of one of the chapters in that book, for example.
And another assumption that jumped out to me whilst you were saying that you wrote about in that book is the idea that there are laws of nature, which is an idea which, as you pointed out, actually comes directly from religion and the idea of God's laws. And so maybe this unexamined assumption is preventing us from considering other possibilities For example, as you suggested, that what we call laws of nature might in fact be more like trends which evolve over billions of years, maybe. You've talked about some of the evidence that that might actually be true. Could you talk about that a bit?
Yes, the assumption that all the laws of nature were there at the moment of the Big Bang, that they're eternal and changeless, is definitely a hangover from 17th century theology, when the laws of nature were thought to be ideas in the mind of a law-giving God. God was seen as a kind of cosmic emperor and also a cosmic law enforcement agency who made everything obey the laws. It's tremendously anthropocentric imagery, and there's not a shred of evidence that all the laws were there at the moment of the Big Bang. I mean, how could one prove that? One would have to go back to the moment of the Big Bang and test to see if all the laws were there. It's just an assumption. And in a radically evolutionary universe, I think it makes much more sense to think of the laws as evolving, or better still, as habits. Instead of there being a kind of mind outside the universe in which these laws exist in a kind of eternal transcendent mode, which is the implicit assumption of conventional science, strange though that may seem. Instead, I think that they're habits that build up within nature, and there's a kind of memory. So, for example, if you make a new kind of crystal for the first time, synthesize a new chemical, crystallize it, it may take quite a long time for the crystal to form, because there is no habit for that crystal forming. But once it's formed, then the next time you make it, there should be influence from the first time by the process I call morphic resonance. And the more often you do it, the more influence from the past there'll be.
The JVs. What's that? Oh, James Brown was true. Okay. Yeah, ain't nobody really did it like James Brown. He was one of them damn trendsetters. Trendsetter. Motherfucker do that wiggle, then drop down to his knees and pop back up. What? Wait a minute. Wait, do that again, old man. Come on the stage with a damn a cloak, a cape on. Yo, that new Flying Lotus album got a track with George Clinton on it, yo. George Clinton still busting the moves. It's all hot too, yo.
Oh, shit. Can you get those off for me really quick? Do you see it? Is there a lot there? That's good? I'll stay. It's too hot.
I'll be down in a minute. What time is it? Yeah, it is pretty hot up in here. Yo, that's crazy. Yeah, I say Clinton still busting it. We've been doing it since like the 60s. I know something that they don't know, babe. I know something that they don't know. Yeah, he killed that song. Shoot.
Built up. And the result will be that the compound will crystallize more quickly and more easily. And there's already a lot of evidence that actually happens. So this view of nature shows nature as evolving through natural selection. The habits that are repeated often become more habitual. New patterns of activity that don't work don't get repeated and don't become habits. So there's a kind of natural selection giving rise to the habits of nature. It's radically evolutionary, rather than the conventional view that all these laws are fixed at the moment of the Big Bang. It makes quite a big difference in the way we think about evolution and think about nature, and I think fits the facts better.
Right. Let's stay with this really extraordinary example of how crystals synthesizing more quickly the more that chemists crystallize them. And presumably this is with rare crystals, which we don't often see in nature. And apparently this is happening no matter where in the world we're crystallizing these. Is that right?
Chemists have found, they've known for a long time, that if you make new compounds and crystallize them over and over again, they seem to get easier to crystallize all over the world. Although chemists know that, and it's part of the sort of folklore of chemistry, they don't, of course, explain it in terms of morphic resonance. They have other explanations that are not usually rigorously tested, but basically a way of explaining it away. Either they assume that fragments of crystals from previous crystallizations have been carried from lab to lab on the clothing or beards of migrant chemists, or they assume that the invisible dust particles with bits of previous crystals have wafted around the world in the atmosphere and have settled in labs all over the world. What I'm suggesting instead is that even if you stop migrant chemists with contaminated clothing entering the lab and to filter out dust particles from the air, this should still happen at this greater speed of crystallization. And this also predicts that compounds that have been around for a very long time, crystallize in nature, would crystallize more easily than newly synthesized compounds. also predicts that the crystals would be more stable, and as compounds become more stable, as crystals become more stable, it's harder to break them up. And that leads to the very surprising prediction that newly formed compounds will have melting points that rise.
We are on track to hit a 1.5% growth increase by the end of the quarter.
If we reduce executive salaries by just...
Because they get more stable, so it's harder to break them up. You need more heat to break them up. So the melting point should go up. And as I show in my book, A New Science of Life, which is in its third edition retitled Morphic Resonance in the United States, still called A New Science of Life in Britain, I show that there is actually evidence that melting points of new compounds do go up, whereas ones that have been around for millions of years in crystallizing in nature are pretty stable. They've reached a sort of steady groove of habit where you don't notice any further change. So again, I think there's good empirical evidence for morphic resonance from crystals.
It's really an extraordinary idea to say that crystals potentially synthesizing more quickly would occur not just here or on the other side of the world, but on the other side of the galaxy or just anywhere in the universe. Is that really what you're suggesting? Is this an entirely non-local effect?
I'm assuming it is. Of course, I can't prove it because I don't have access to laboratories on the other side of the galaxy. But that's my assumption. You know, the philosopher of science, Karl Popper, said that the best kind of scientific hypothesis is one that makes bold predictions which can be tested experimentally. And I prefer to have the boldest possible prediction, which is that this doesn't fall off with distance. And that would mean that habits of nature that grew up anywhere in the universe would spread. No one knows how fast, but they'd spread throughout the whole universe. I think that's why the atoms and molecules on distant galaxies behave the same way as they do here, because they have the same habits, rather than following the same universal laws, which is the conventional assumption. I think that the spread of these crystal forms, yes, I think it would extend across the galaxy. And this leads to the idea that if you make hundreds of new compounds, and you then, in labs on Earth, find out which ones crystallize quicker and quicker the more often you make them, you might find that some of them don't do that. And if they've never existed on Earth, this might imply that they've existed somewhere else in the universe. And we'd actually be able to map what is new on Earth compared with the rest of the universe, a kind of space probe into the rest of the universe, just in a terrestrial laboratory by looking at crystal forms, which would be a far cheaper way and probably more effective way of exploring what's happening elsewhere in the universe than sending heavy rockets up into space. So I think this has testable implications and ones that could actually shed light on other parts of the universe.
To me, it's quite amazing to imagine that maybe a single group of chemists synthesizing crystals in a laboratory could be having such, cosmic ramifications to molecular chemistry all throughout the universe. And, certainly could be possible that we've hugely underappreciated the level of our participation with the rest of the universe. But while that admittedly does strain my intuition, of course, it's not to say that it isn't true. And yeah, like you said, this could be testable, or at least we might be able to look at the ways in which different chemical compounds do speed up, and perhaps that could be an indicator of what's happening out there in the universe, and maybe the propensity of life if we were looking at rare organic compounds.
I think all those things are possible, and obviously it's a mind-boggling idea, but after all, when you think about conventional science, it's pretty mind-boggling to think that just by studying natural phenomena in laboratories on Earth or through Earth-bound radio telescopes or observatories, or even the Hubble Space Telescope orbiting around the Earth, that we can probe the rest.
All right, guys, I'm about to get out of here. I got a couple more days of work. Gotta be up early. So, only try to get like an hour of painting in. We'll work on this some more tomorrow. Peace.